Las Vegas, 1972. A glittering hotel lounge, velvet lights, and the clink of glasses. Witnesses recall Elvis Presley paused mid-laughter when a diner's harsh words cut across the room. The target, a young waitress, tray trembling in her hands. In seconds, the king rose from his seat and silence followed. If stories of courage and kindness move you, you're in the right place. Stay with us to hear how Elvis turned one ugly moment into a lesson a room full of strangers never forgot. The night was ordinary until it WASN single quotes. It was Las Vegas. 1972. Inside the lounge of a glittering strip hotel. The atmosphere hummed with wealth and velvet showmanship. Golden chandeliers glowed down through cigarette haze, tinting the air with a faint amber mist. A jazz trio shuffled through standards in the corner, bass strings thrumming like a heartbeat beneath the chatter of late-night diners. Glasses clinked. Laughter floated across the room in waves. At a private table near the center sat Elvis Presley. He wore an ivory suit with a subtle shimmer, a pale blue shirt open at the collar. Rings flashed whenever his hands moved, catching the light like camera flashes. To those who caught glimpses of him between servers and cigarette smoke, it was surreal, the king of rock and roll, eating like any other guest. He leaned back, laughing with his small circle of friends. Their table was alive with energy, quiet jokes, a bottle of champagne sweating in its bucket, the sharp scent of citrus from freshly peeled orange slices. Then, the mood snapped. From across the room came a voice, sharp, mocking, ugly. It cut through the hum like a blade. "Can't you do anything right?" The words were aimed at a waitress balancing a tray. A thin glass rattled against a porcelain cup. She steadied it, eyes wide. The insult rolled over her like a slap. The jazz players faltered for half a beat, then recovered, but the air in the lounge had changed. Conversation slowed, like people weren't sure they had just heard what they'd heard. The young waitress, early 20s, brown hair pinned back, freckles visible in the light, stood frozen with her tray. A thin line of cola dripped down from one glass, wetting her wrist. She muttered an apology, but the diner who'd barked at her wasn't finished. He leaned back in his seat, smirking to his companions. A witness later described it this way: "It was like watching someone kick a stray dog, unnecessary, cruel, and everyone saw it." At Elvis's table, the laughter stopped. He turned, his smile drained, replaced with stillness. One hand rested flat against the tablecloth, the other curled into a subtle fist, rings pressed into his palm. His eyes, a pale, penetrating blue, locked on the scene. The waitress's lip trembled. For a moment, she tried to pretend nothing had happened. She lowered her gaze, clutching the tray tighter. But the room felt different now. People weren't looking at the man who had spoken. They were looking at Elvis, waiting to see what he would do. He didn't move at first. Just silence. The kind that stretches, making everyone uncomfortable. The kind that says, "Something is about to happen." A man at Elvis's table leaned in, whispered something under his breath. Elvis didn't answer. His jaw tightened. The air between him and the scene across the room felt electric. Guests exchanged glances. Whispers began to ripple. Some thought he'd ignore it, keep the peace, let the staff handle it. After all, Elvis wasn't just a celebrity. He was the most recognizable man in the room. To step in meant drawing every eye, every story, every headline. But then, a small moment tipped the balance. The waitress turned, tray still trembling, and for the briefest second, her eyes met his. Witnesses recall her glance as desperate, almost a plea. And in that instant, Elvis made a choice. He leaned forward, planting both hands on the table. The wood creaked under the pressure. His chair scraped backward. The lounge froze again, because everyone realized Elvis Presley was standing, and what happened next would silence the room. The scrape of his chair cut through the lounge like a cymbal crash. Heads turned. A low ripple of whispers swept the room. Elvis Presley was on his feet. He didn't rush. He didn't need to. Every move was deliberate, carrying the gravity of someone who understood the power of silence. He smoothed the front of his white suit jacket, the fabric gleaming softly under chandelier light. Gold cufflinks caught and flared, tiny flashes like sparks. The waitress still stood frozen. Her tray had lowered toward her hip, as if she didn't know whether to stay or flee. A bead of soda trailed from the rim of a glass onto her hand. She wiped it against her apron, cheeks flushed crimson, across the room. The diner, a broad man in his 40s, tie loosened, face flushed from drink, shifted uncomfortably. He forced a laugh, trying to turn the insult into a joke. "Hey, it's nothing, folks. Just a little spill, right?" But his eyes betrayed him. They flickered nervously toward the figure approaching. Elvis's footsteps were soft, but the whole lounge seemed to hear them. Thick carpet muted the sound, yet somehow each step carried weight. Echoing in the minds of those watching, conversations died completely. Even the trio in the corner abandoned their tune. The pluck of a bass string faded into silence. The closer Elvis came, the more the offender's smile faltered. He reached for his drink, fingers brushing the rim of the glass, but the tremor in his hand betrayed the unease crawling through him. Elvis stopped just beside the waitress. For a moment, he said nothing. Instead, he reached out with a steady hand, gently resting it on her shoulder. The gesture was small, but it was enough. Her eyes flickered up in shock. Her breathing slowed. The tray steadied in her grasp. Then Elvis turned. His gaze locked on the man. The lounge seemed to hold its breath. Up close, Elvis's presence was impossible to ignore. He wasn't just a performer under stage lights now. He was a man standing for something. Every ounce of his fame and power condensed into this one quiet standoff. "Son." The word rolled out low, smooth, but edged with steel. His voice carried without strain, reaching the back tables as if delivered through a microphone. The man froze. Mid-grin, "Son," Elvis repeated. "You don't treat a lady like that." The weight of the sentence landed heavier than a shout ever could. No flourish, no theatrics, just truth, spoken with authority that silenced every whisper. A pause followed, a pause so sharp it seemed the room might split in half. The offender tried to muster a grin again, to wave it off, but his lips faltered. The glass in his hand rattled faintly against the table. He muttered something about just kidding, but no one laughed this time. Elvis didn't move closer. He didn't need to. His hand stayed firm on the waitress's shoulder, anchoring her as much as anchoring the moment itself. For the first time since the insult, she lifted her chin. The crowd leaned forward, sensing that something bigger than a celebrity encounter was unfolding. A lesson was coming, and everyone knew it. And in the silence of that lounge, all eyes were locked on the king, waiting for his next words. What he said next would shift the entire room. Elvis leaned slightly forward, his hand still resting on the waitress's shoulder. His voice dropped, but somehow carried to every corner of the room. You don't talk to a lady like that. It wasn't shouted. It wasn't dramatic. But the words cracked through the air sharper than any raised voice could. The man shifted in his chair, his smirk collapsing into a thin, nervous line. His companions glanced at each other, unsure whether to laugh or shrink back. He began, fumbling. It was just a joke, you know. Just kidding around. Elvis tilted his head, eyes narrowing ever so slightly. A pause stretched, waited. Then came a slow shake of his head. That's not how we joke. The crowd hushed. A soft cough from somewhere in the back sounded thunderous in the silence. Every diner leaned in, caught between discomfort and awe. The waitress's breathing steadied under Elvis's hand. Her tray had lowered fully now, tucked to her side, as if she finally realized she wasn't standing there alone anymore. Witnesses recall the man reaching for his glass again, lifting it halfway before realizing his fingers were trembling. The ice clinked faintly against the rim. He set it back down with a clumsy thud. Elvis straightened to his full height. The air seemed to shift around him. His presence filled the space, commanding without force. Respect, he said. The word rolling like a verdict. That's something every man ought to know. The offender tried again. His voice came out thinner this time, strained. I didn't mean, but Elvis didn't let him finish. A glance, steady, unblinking, cut him short. Some in the lounge would later say, the moment felt like a performance, like Elvis was on stage. But those who were closest insisted it wasn't. It was real. It was raw. It was a man using nothing but his words and presence to set a boundary. And then came the ripple. It began with a murmur of approval at one table. A quiet, that's right. Then another voice echoed, firmer. Applause broke from the back, hesitant at first, then growing as more joined in. Soon, a wave of clapping and cheers rolled across the lounge. The man who had insulted the waitress shrank under the sound, face reddening, hands gripping the edge of his table as if bracing against the weight of the room. Elvis didn't move to capitalize on the applause. He didn't smile, didn't bow. He simply remained, a steady figure anchoring the moment. The praise wasn't for him. It was for the truth he'd just spoken. The waitress looked up at him fully now, her eyes shining. She opened her mouth as if to speak, but found no words. Elvis gave a small nod, reassuring. Then, finally, he released her shoulder. Though the steadiness lingered as if transferred, the applause faded into a hush again, everyone waiting, wondering if the king was finished, or if there was more. And in that breathless pause, one thing was certain. Elvis Presley hadn't just silenced a man. He had taken control of the entire room, but what he chose to do with that power would surprise everyone next. The hush that followed was heavy, almost reverent. The offender sat small now, shoulders hunched, eyes darting anywhere but toward Elvis. The waitress shifted awkwardly, as though she wanted to disappear, her tray tucked tight against her body. She whispered, barely audible, "It's okay, Mr. Presley." Really? But Elvis turned to her with a gentle shake of his head. His expression softened, but his voice stayed firm. "No, ma'am, it's not okay." The words were deliberate, spoken with the same cadence he'd use on stage before a song that mattered most. And just like then, the room leaned in, waiting. He lowered his hand from her shoulder only to gesture, open-palmed, as if presenting her to the crowd. "What's your name?" he asked. The waitress blinked, caught off guard. "M. Mary," She stammered. Elvis nodded, repeating it so the entire room could hear. Mary. His voice carried her name with a kind of weight, as if restoring it from where it had been trampled moments before. The crowd responded instantly. Applause broke out again, louder this time. Not for him, for her. For Mary, strangers clapped. Some even whistled, turning the humiliation she'd just endured into a moment of dignity. Mary's lips parted in astonishment. She looked around, stunned at the faces cheering for her. The heat of embarrassment on her cheeks was slowly replaced by something else. Pride. Elvis raised a finger, signaling for quiet. The applause softened, leaving only the faint hum of air conditioning and the clatter of a glass. Somewhere at the back, she deserves your kindness, he said evenly, his gaze sweeping across the tables, same as you'd want for your own. The statement landed hard. It wasn't just aimed at the man who'd spoken, it was for everyone. A mirror held up to the room. The offender bowed his head, his face pale now. He muttered something, maybe an apology, maybe nothing at all, but no one cared to listen. The spotlight had shifted entirely. Mary exhaled shakily, lowering her tray to a side table as another waitress stepped in to take it from her. Her hands, moments ago trembling, now rested calm at her sides. She was standing taller, her eyes no longer fixed on the floor but on the man beside her. One witness later recalled, "You could feel the power shift." That girl walked in a servant, and in less than a minute, Elvis made her the star. For the first time that night, Mary smiled. It wasn't wide, not yet, but it was real. A quiet smile that carried the weight of relief and gratitude. Elvis noticed. He gave a small nod of approval, as if to say, "That's better." The crowd erupted again, this time on its own, no signal needed. The offender was invisible now, lost in the sound of strangers celebrating a waitress they'd never met before tonight. Elvis stepped back just slightly, letting the applause wash over her. His role was not to steal it, but to redirect it, a gesture that spoke louder than words. Mary's eyes glistened. She mouthed, "Thank you." Elvis didn't answer out loud. He simply touched the brim of an invisible hat in a small, respectful salute. And just when it seemed the moment had reached its peak, the room quieted again, sensing there was still more to come. Because Elvis Presley wasn't finished, and what he chose to do next would turn a private lesson into a story that lasted for decades. For a few moments, it felt as if the entire lounge was suspended in time, applause fading into a hum of whispers. The weight of what had just happened still settling into every corner. Elvis stood beside Mary, calm and steady, but his eyes softened now. The confrontation was over. The lesson had been delivered. Yet, as the crowd slowly returned to their seats, it became clear he wasn't walking away just yet. Reports differ on what exactly happened next, but one thread weaves through them all. Elvis found a way to turn the silence into grace. Some recall him reaching into his pocket, pulling out a folded bill and slipping it onto Mary's tray before nudging it toward her with a quiet nod. Others insist it was far more than a bill, that he quietly covered her entire shift's wages, pressing a wad of cash into her palm so discreetly that only she and a few close tables noticed. What everyone agrees on is the look on Mary's face. Her hand flew to her mouth, eyes filling, as though the weight she carried all evening had suddenly lifted. Witnesses also tell another version, one where Elvis didn't just leave it at money. He turned to the jazz trio in the corner, snapping his fingers softly. a single piano chord rang out. Then Elvis began humming the first gentle line of Love Me Tender. At first, it was just him, his voice quiet, filling the hush like a prayer. But then, almost miraculously, the crowd joined in. Dozens of voices, then hundreds, layered on top of his. The lounge became a chorus, strangers united by a song they all knew by heart. Mary stood at the center of it, hands pressed together, her name still echoing in her ears, her dignity restored in front of everyone. The man who had insulted her shrank into his seat, invisible in the wave of harmony. No one looked at him anymore. The spotlight was elsewhere, on kindness, on grace, on redemption. When the final line of the song fell away, the applause thundered. But again, it wasn't just for Elvis. It was for Mary. It was for the moment itself. Elvis leaned toward her, speaking softly enough that only she and perhaps the nearest tables could hear. "Keep smiling, darling," he said. A simple line, but one she would remember forever. He gave her shoulder one last reassuring squeeze, then turned back toward his table. As he walked, the crowd erupted once more, not in the frenzy of a concert, but in the warm, unified applause of people who knew they had just witnessed something unforgettable. And yet, the story didn't end there, because, a week later, according to several who knew her, Mary opened her modest apartment door to find a delivery waiting. A bouquet of flowers, white roses, arranged simply, tied with a ribbon. Tucked inside was a handwritten note. It read, "Keep smiling. Elvis." Mary wept as she read it. Neighbors who saw her that day remembered her holding the card to her chest, whispering the words aloud. The gesture was small compared to Elvis's fame, his wealth, his towering legacy. But for one young waitress, it was everything. And for those who heard the story passed down, some directly from witnesses, others retold in whispers, it became the detail that made the moment shareable, unforgettable, eternal. Because in that lounge, Elvis Presley hadn't just defended her. He made sure she knew she mattered. Long after the applause had faded, that night in Las Vegas was not recorded on film, not broadcast to millions. It lived only in memory, in the eyes of those who sat beneath the chandeliers, in the hush of a crowd that saw kindness, silence, cruelty. For Mary, the young waitress, it was more than a moment. Friends later recalled how she spoke of it often, saying it was the first time in her life she felt seen, not as someone carrying trays through smoke-filled lounges, but as a person worthy of respect. She would tell others, "Elvis made me believe one kind voice could change a room." For the guests, it became a story they carried for years, retold in living rooms and coffee shops. The night Elvis Presley stopped everything to defend a stranger. The details sometimes blurred. Was it a song he sang, or only words? Was it money he left, or flowers that arrived later? But the core never changed. He chose dignity over spectacle, humanity over silence, and in the larger story of Elvis, it was a reminder that greatness isn't only measured in records sold or concerts filled. Sometimes it's in the quiet stands, the moments when a man with the world's eyes upon him chooses to use that power for someone unseen. That night, Elvis Presley gave a lesson far louder than any guitar riff. True strength is in lifting others. If this story moved you, share it with someone who believes kindness can stop a room. And tell us in the comments, what's the greatest act of respect or courage you've ever witnessed in your own life?